All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. Super excited for this one. Today I have with me Oshin from the Obol Collective. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so I mean, I think most people watching this will undoubtedly know about you guys, but like, if you could give a brief background, what is Obol and what you guys do?
Yeah, so Obol, I think in the short high level is that we work on decentralizing Ethereum. What we're going to spend most of our time talking about of distributed validators is a type of tech that came out of the Ethereum Foundation originally. And assuming this is a crypto native audience, I would tell them that it's basically a multi-sig for a validator. So the idea that you have an Ethereum validator and instead of it running on one computer, you have it run on four, and only three of them machines need to be on and working and honest and uncompromised. And if that happens, your validator will behave and work as needed. It doesn't have to be four. You can do seven, 10 more, but four is generally mostly the minimum. You can do it with three as well, but you lose some of the security properties going that low.
Yeah, I mean, what was kind of like I know you're one of the founders, but what was kind of the goal going in? Like was it mainly to address the stake part that it's a whole lot of money, or was it something else going in?
I would say for me, I would say it was a bit of concern about proof of stake generally as a
Really?
consensus protocol. So I would have joined crypto. I got full time into the space when I joined Consensus in 2018, and Ethereum was proof of work back then. And I had, first learned about it then, and I learned about the energy use of proof of work then, and I was like, oh, this is a problem. This isn't really tolerable. Like, what's the fix here? And then, people said the fix is proof of stake, and I was like, okay, let's look this up. And I looked into proof of stake, and I was not super thrilled with the idea. I wrote an article at the time called The Staking Problem, and the crux of the idea was that I don't believe proof of stake will be compromised with one of these fancy balancing attacks where everyone gets slashed or something of the sort. I think proof of stake will be compromised by a majority controlling fork choice and just soft ignoring transactions they don't want and taking control over the network, and it's no longer permissionless and decentralized. If more than 51% of the nodes say what gets in or say what the kind of chain is, it's kind of over. This is similarly a problem with proof of work too, but obviously with different risks. So I wrote that article in 2018 and kept going, didn't really think so much about it or stayed interested in the roadmap as it was being developed. I was unfortunately laid off, like many others from Consensus, at the crypto bottom in March 2020, and I set myself up self-employed. And I fortunately landed on my feet and got picked up by a node operating company called Block Daemon to do
Yeah.
ETH2 research for them. And at the time, I had been like running ETH2 testnet node. We don't even call it ETH2 anymore. And I ended up building out their like proof of stake setup for them. And along the way, I got introduced to the Ethereum Foundation community calls on what we know today is distributed validator technology. And I was pretty immediately a convert. As soon as I saw this, I was like, yeah, this is definitely how validators are going to run. Nobody's going to put billions of dollars on a single computer and then freak out when that computer breaks, which it inevitably will. Instead, you'll run it, highly available is how I would describe it. So was familiar with the organizers. It was Colin Myers, my co-founder, and Mara Schmidt, the founder of the Liquid Collective. So was pretty involved there. And Colin and I ended up going full time building this in about mid 2021. And I wrote kind of follow-up articles where I basically said that, small groups running stake is our best chance at keeping Ethereum fork choice decentralized. I kind of figure that if we have all of our stake in single entities, that it would be inevitability that fork choice would be compromised. But if we have diverse groups running this stake, it's much harder to kind of compromise a group, and even to do anything that leans a bit unethical, it's much harder to say, "Hey guys, do you want to do this slightly sus thing?" People are much less likely to do that when they're kind of, with a group of peers versus if they have, total control over the stake. So yeah, that's kind of the mission and why I'm in. I would kind of call myself an ETH maxi, and that's kind of what brought me to it more than anything.
No, that's super cool. Yeah, maybe over time we'll maybe we can chat about yeah what you think about Ethereum's fork choice at the moment. But kind of double tapping on like you got into it just to kind of keep stake decentralized, you know, so we can set the framing up for everybody. Like I read one of your tweets a couple months ago. It was if you measure proof of stake security as a dollar amount staked, you're looking at wrong risks. Quality of stake is more important than the quantity of stake. Um, do you care to explain?
Yeah. Um, so uh, there's a current, topic or people in the kind of ETH staking community that talk about economic security, as I use in kind of quotation marks.
It's a meme, right?
It is a meme. I'm unfortunately kind of with Tolly in that it's kind of fake.
Yes.
And the reason I say it's a meme, well, not to say it's a meme, there's obviously some legitimacy to it. The concept is it's how much, ether or like measured in dollars would be destroyed if the economic guarantees of the chain, didn't hold up. So namely, if finality didn't hold up, somebody, reorged the chain in a way that like wasn't supposed to happen, you can be sure that at least one third of all stake would be destroyed if that happened. And there's something in the region of 100 billion staked at the moment. So you could say, I know to $33 billion worth of guarantee that, my transaction is not going to be reorged if it's been more than 15 minutes and it's now been like marked as finalized. So that's, the idea and where it comes from. But and as a result, you have some people saying, "Oh, we have enough security. $33 billion is loads." But I don't really agree because I don't really think it's a meaningful measure, or it's not, the important measure of a blockchain in my eyes. I think what's much more important for a blockchain is it decentralized? Is it permissionless? Is it fair? Can I like, use it like everyone else? And in that, I think what's much more important is fork choice. Fork choice is a fancy word for saying who gets to put the next block on the chain and like how do we kind of progress. And the way you usually would measure the like how decentralized fork choice is something called the Nakamoto coefficient, named after Satoshi from Bitcoin. And it is a measure of how many different groups do you have to add up until you have more than 51% of, the fork choice or the voting weight, the hashing power, things like that. So in a very centralized network, it might be, 1 to 5 groups of people. In a very decentralized place, it might be like 50. And I think that is much more important than economic security. The kind of, I've been told it's a strawman argument, but the idea of if Coinbase ran 60% of the network, you could have billions of dollars of economic security, but you don't really have any good quality or you've no real decentralization. Really, Coinbase picks, what's getting put in the
Right.
chain. So that's, maybe a little contrived, but it is my definition of why economic security is not what you should care about if you're thinking, measuring a chain. You should be much more interested in the quantity or the quality of stake, i.e., is it well decentralized? Is it, a nice and even Gini coefficient? Is there one dude that has it all, or is it like many different people that, run nodes? So that's kind of where I'm getting at with that, and why I think that Ethereum is not really as decentralized as it should be, and it's not really going the right direction either, unfortunately. But I'm, doing my best to try and put that in a better direction.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of lay out for other people, like what to walk people through, like in my mind, what the history of is of like proof of stake validator centralization. It's like you have like all of these market forces out there that tend to push things towards centralization, right? Like even just like Bitcoin, it's obvious, like, you know, proof of work is it scales, it's physical, like whoever controls the energy, which is obviously very centralizing towards the top. But in proof of stake, it's like you have exchanges with gigantic wallets. People tend to not hold their own coins, and then you also have delegation, which is probably the biggest factor, right? Like Lido, for instance. I think they came. When did they come about? 2021 was launch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were pretty close to mainnet launch, so I guess 2021 because it launched in December of 2020. So yeah, probably early 21.
So it's this idea of why would I run my own validator on my own computer whenever I can just get rewards by delegating my coins to somebody else running a validator. And it's sort of most, I would say most people would use that now because it tends to be really hard to run a validator. So, and it leads to more and more people just giving control to a few people who are really good at running validators, and you have kind of this professional validator set. So like we're trying to fight against it in some ways, but in my mind, like I think we've gotten to this point where are like what are the ways that we can sort of push back against that? What are the pros and cons of maybe that setup? Would love to just hear kind of your thoughts.
Yeah. So there's different reasons why there's centralization. You kind of touched on a few of them. I think one of them is just raw complexity of, running a node that's not super easy. The node falls over, you got to go fix it. This is some of the reasons where distributed validators really helps it. You can do what we call squad staking, where you run with the group, and so long as, three-quarters of you are up at the same time, your node is online. But complexity isn't really maybe the top difficulty. I would say like actual economic cost is very big one. It is 32 ETH, something in the region of 120,000 US these days to get involved. The normal way to stake. That is a little lower if you kind of partner up in some of these liquid staking protocols where you put up, you know, 1 ETH of it or, 4 ETH of it or something of the sort, and then they add on the rest. But that's still a pretty massive barrier. But even cost and liquidity are the two that I come back to as the most important ones. So, as you alluded to, running a Bitcoin miner is quite expensive. You have to pay electricity, and there's not as much economic economies of scale as there is a proof of stake. With proof of stake, the marginal cost to run a little bit of extra stake is almost zero. You can run 1 million ETH on 10 grand a year if you know what you're doing and you set up your service right. It is extremely, extremely cheap to run any extra stuff, but there's a pretty high barrier to entry to get started.
Right.
Even if you're running a single node on your own, it's call it $1,000 for the machine, might last you 4 years, 250 a year. Electricity for a machine is another at least 50, depending on where you are in the world. Internet, if you're, pricing that, your labor, pricing that, it very quickly becomes a few $100s a year to run a node. Or you can pay 10% of your fees to Lido. And if you're a large provider, you can pay almost as low as 1% these days because there's an oversupply of node operators and all of their marginal costs are very low. So they're just competing, competing, competing on price to the idea that it is extremely cheap to delegate ETH these days if you have a lot of it. So that is a pretty big reason that it's just economically rational to delegate your stake because it's just cheaper than doing it yourself. There's obviously risks involved, and I'm sure we'll talk about that plenty. But another one that is a pretty large blocker and one that I wish we could do something about, and we can, but there's not necessarily quite the incentive for it, is related to this exit queue. So deliberately, Ethereum has a queue to enter and exit. The idea behind it is to stop massive changes to the size of the validating set very quickly. Makes sense. However, without any way to pay to skip the queue or to do anything about it, this is a pretty big barrier to what we would kind of call native staking or like staking directly with the protocol. And this is one of the big reasons why we have liquid staking tokens. It's not the only reason, but it's a pretty large one. People, if you buy a liquid staking token, you can swap your ETH directly for this token that accrues, 90% of the rewards that the native staking is, minus your fees. And you can sell that in an exchange instantaneously if you ever change your mind. So there's currently a 45-day queue to exit the normal
Oh,
way,
geez.
or zero if otherwise. That's a bit uncharacteristically high at the moment. Normally it's maybe in the kind of weeks, but it
Yeah, it's
the
still a lot.
liquidity difference is very hard for a lot of, non-diehard stakers that are like, maybe ETH's going to go up a lot and I'd like to take some risk off the table, but I'm stuck for weeks or months. That's uncomfortable. I'd much rather hold a liquid staking token and I can, take some risk off or I can sell some or something of the sort. So Yeah, I would say costs and liquidity are two big ones. And the last one even is with MEV. The big centralized pools of validators make more MEV on average than the kind of long tail because it's not equally spread. It's kind of very spiky. So if you have a large amount of stake, you're more likely to get some of these like, massive payouts. So you also even make higher APR as well as having lower cost and having better liquidity. So there's unfortunately lots of real reasons to favor centralization, and I think more could be to some extent done to kind of mitigate some of these. We can maybe chat about that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, even like I know some of the proposals, like now more and more people are continuing to stake with liquid staking, right? Like if you're an exchange sitting on ETH, why wouldn't you do this? Like it just makes a whole lot of sense. Same with if you're an ETF coming in, why wouldn't you be a staking ETF? All of this stuff makes sense, but like as a result, like the protocol, even I know Ethereum's talked about like we're going to reduce rewards, right? Because like you
Hmm.
really don't like you don't want 100% of people staking. That would be bad. So like we should reduce rewards, but then it becomes even more less profitable for the little guy running one on his own. Yeah, just wondering how you think about like which which direction do you think it's going to go in that sense?
Yeah, my fear with with those types of suggestions is that the kind of cure is worse than the disease. Um, As you point out, cutting issuance makes the solo staker, the long tail staker, even more unprofitable. Sometimes like 10x more unprofitable, whereas you don't really change the node operators much at all. And one of the big reasons why, and it's kind of one of the problems I have with the kind of economic research here, is a lot of the economic research is done under the assumption that the person with the ETH is the person running the node. But that's not really what happens in 95% of the cases. 95% of the cases, there's some delegation going on. And in the delegation case, the node operator is not getting paid on the real rate. They're getting paid as a function of the nominal rate. So they don't really care that the real rate isn't effective because they're getting paid nominal. They don't really mind that, oh, ETH is, issuing it like such and such per year. So
Right, they're a custodian and they're sitting on ETH. They,
yeah,
yeah.
and they get paid as a function of the 2.2%. And even if,
Yes.
we're printing 1.5% and that the delegate is only making 0.75, that doesn't matter to the node operator. So you don't actually hurt the big centralized parties like you think. Maybe you turn out, you dissuade some delegators. They're like, okay, I would have done it for a 2% real rate, but at a 1% real rate, it doesn't, like, it's not worth it for me. But I think what you really do is you wipe out the 80% of the long tail. And I think that is worse, as I kind of alluded to. They're, trying to optimize for economic security, whereas I'm trying to optimize for like Nakamoto coefficient. And that's why I'm pretty of the opinion that cutting issuance will do more harm than good when it comes to, making the chain more decentralized. But it depends on what you're trying to optimize for. Not everyone here is trying to optimize for making the chain more decentralized. Some of them are trying to optimize for eat the native asset being the kind of best money. And to do that, they have to nerf liquid staking tokens. But you really don't impact liquid staking tokens as much as you think because of the fact that they're getting paid nominal rates, no matter where on the curve they are. So yeah, I am not the biggest fan of the issuance research that has been done today, to be honest.
Yes. Well, I mean, in some sense too, like how do you think about scaling nowadays? Because like whether it's like some of the arguments for the bigger validators would be like, listen, like we're going to need to compete with Solana. We need to run
Mhm.
500 million transactions per second. So we're gonna have to have bigger machines, and we're gonna have to like these are gonna have to be professional validators. And then listen, you home guys, you're gonna validate it with ZK, and it's gonna be good, right?
Yeah,
Is that good?
I I agree with them.
Okay.
I think scaling Ethereum is more important than running a validator on your watch or running it on a really old machine. I think that that's kind of one of the places where the people that maybe want to cut issuance, they'll be like, don't worry, we'll just like lower how much it costs to run a node and it'll be fine. It'll work out. You'll be able to run a node for $50. And I'm like, but that's not really what we should be optimizing for. We do
Right, like
need
if
to
it's going
scale
to
the
cost
network.
me $1,000 on a server, it doesn't really matter for about the cost then.
Yes, and I think it's to some extent better to just accept the fact that it's going to cost, a reasonable amount. I think the it often helps to talk about the kind of what the social contract is for running Ethereum. And to me, that is something around the lines of you should be able to run Ethereum on an average consumer device for like current gen or like a high spec last gen type of device. I really don't think you need to run it on a 10-year-old machine or something like really cheap. I think it's just like not really like what we should be optimizing for. And I also don't think we can afford to point at some tech in the distance and be like, one of these days we're going to have it, because for the last 2+ years I've been told that we'll, have Verkle and that, running machines will be cheap, and Verkle is not on the roadmap anymore. So I don't really think that's going to happen. But going a little bit further, sometimes there's also this opinion that, oh, if only we could pump the specs, kill off all of the like indie stakers, it would scale way more. And I actually don't really agree with that. And one of the main reasons is ETH's scaling roadmap is a scale execution, scale blobs, and improve UX. And blobs, or like data availability, it is super important to have lots of nodes if you want to have lots of data availability. More specifically, this next upgrade that we're going to get in Fusaka, it'll bring in what's called data availability sampling. And what's special about that is we've had these blobs for, I don't know, a year or so now. However, all of the full nodes on the network are downloading all of them right now, and they're gossiping all of them, and everyone's keeping like all of this blob data. At the moment, we haven't kind of turned on the scaling thing. The scaling thing comes down to this idea of sampling, which is where you just spot check this data. You don't download it all, you don't verify it at all. You just like, if I check a piece of this one, 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 I know that all of the data is there, and I haven't had to download it all. And this, uses quite a lot of fancy cryptography to make it happen. But what's important about it is if you have a lot of different nodes sampling this data, you have very high guarantees that the data is available. If you have very few nodes sampling the data, it is not so safe to assume that,
Right.
all of the data is there and you have to sample more. So if you go to a world where like, okay, Ethereum is going to compete with Solana and Tempo and these, and we're going to have 100 nodes or something, and most of them are going to be like, white labeled and run by the same companies, you can't really sample a much smaller fraction of the data than is actually out there. You can't, 10x the amount of data availability versus what every node has to sample. Instead, you have to be much more conservative, and maybe you can only get like a 3x out of it. But if you have a huge amount of nodes and they're all really independent, you can say, it could be like closer to 50x. We just, sample a small bit, but there's thousands of us and we're all sampling bits. We can have extremely high security that the data really is there and available. And that's why we need a lot of nodes. And again, there's trade-offs on the execution side. You've already mentioned this whole checking a ZK proof that the block has been like built
Yeah.
correctly. That's kind of the main workaround or fix in that regard. But yeah, ZK like proofs of validity and then a lot of nodes for sampling is really, in my eyes, how we scale Ethereum to where it needs to be. So it's kind of against where people think of like going, oh, let's just pump requirements, have fewer nodes and like ETH will scale. Realistically, you'll have a few big nodes for the builders, and that's fine. But to really scale like DA, you need thousands of indie nodes, not thousands of nodes controlled by like a single or a handful of companies. So yeah, that's kind of roughly where I come down to the scaling roadmap. But I do agree in the costing. There's more important things to be doing than running a validator on a potato. We can just, keep a bit of issuance, have a bit of better like delegation, make it possible to delegate to, the long tail of operators. And that'll be a better fix than trying to lower costs of operating.
I mean, like running nodes has always been this, like early on, it was like run a node was like a virtue signal. Like underneath,
Mhm.
you're gonna go join it and you're gonna run a node. Like we weren't even talking about being validators. You were just gonna run a node, and now it seems like nobody even really talks about that anymore, right? Like
Yeah, we're
you're
working on that.
yeah. I mean, it's cool, but do you think you have to mark incentivize this stuff, or do you think it can be
Yes.
okay? Yeah, explain.
Yeah. We're not gonna realistically achieve decentralization without assuming people are economically rational actors. There is right now 4% of the network that like self-build blocks instead of builders. So you can assume that, there is a couple hundred ideologues that are like, no, I will turn down money and will do things
Yes.
the ideological way. 96% or so extract MBV and say, yes, please, money. So I don't think you're going to get there on running like full nodes. There are a sufficient amount of them, at least not for fork choice, which is my most important kind of aspect. It's good to have a full node that you kind of run in your house for privacy reasons and other things. But in terms of keeping Ethereum decentralized, you need the validators to be, running full nodes and decentralized and like, reporting honestly. And these people are economically rational actors. You can't pretend like there's a little bit of ideology in it, but like not enough to outweigh the economics of a Coinbase or any of these big like entities. So it does have to be mostly economically rational. I think I was doing some math recently. I've been trying to get an addition to the ultrasound money website, which talks about how much money the validator makes, but it ignores costs. Right now, it's 50% more expensive to solo stake a validator than to delegate it to Lido. That's a little bit conservative or making assumptions about what your operating costs are, but I think the numbers are relatively conservative. You'd pay about 16% of your rewards on running a machine versus, 10% if it was on Lido. So yeah, I think while running a full node, you might get people to do for privacy reasons and for others to decentralize Ethereum's fork choice, it has to be economically sensible to be a validator. I don't think you're going to get 51% of the network being ideologues. I don't think you're even getting 5% being ideologues. I think, and it's kind of so far been fairly down only from here. So I do think people have to be serious about economics and stuff when it comes to chains decentralization. Vibes
Yeah.
just won't cut it.
Well, I mean, on fork choice, like I know some people have even said we're beyond forking Ethereum, right? Like it's or I'm sure you've heard like the USDC chooses fork choice, right? Like,
Yeah,
how do you think about that?
I agree.
Okay.
I
Well,
agree
then does it
with
matter? Should we just like
um it matters in so to frame it the piece of it that I agree with. I don't believe we as a community could come together and socially slash, let's say, all of Coinbase retail's Ether because we don't like that Coinbase are dropping transactions and, ignoring transactions that we want to be included. I think that's too subjective of a bad thing, especially because they might say it's like, oh, Tornado Cash, we're not allowed, attest to blocks that have Tornado Cash transactions or whatever the new like boogeyman is. If that were to happen, it is too gray. They have like plausibly some, legal reason to point at it and stuff. And you would have to particularly target, kind of the wrong person, which would be the delegator. Their agent is the one maybe being evil or being malicious, but it'd be the people that are delegating that would be like the target. It does not seem feasible to me that all of the, core devs and stuff will come around and be like, yeah, that is so egregious. We need to burn all of their stake and we're going to socially slash them. I don't think that is going to happen. So for that reason, I think we need fork choice to be like legitimately, decentralized. We're doing pretty okay at the moment. There's, people have stopped censoring Tornado Cash transactions. People aren't expressly like avoiding voting on certain blocks. But I think it could happen. And when it does happen, I don't think we'd have the means or the coordination to like socially slash. So for that reason, I think it's super important that we did, we take fork choice seriously and don't say, we can fix it in post. We can delete the attacker's stake. That doesn't seem believable to me. As for maybe the stronger side of it of, oh, if USDC, rejects the hard fork, that's kind of to some extent downstream of saying, oh, we've decided to socially slash. Like Coinbase is getting a bad rap here. I don't have a problem with Coinbase. They're actually pretty good, but they just are the good like stand-in. Um,
That's why I
but
say we need to make them seem more evil, so we're all
yeah,
okay with it, right?
yeah, exactly. You have to, pillory them or something. But yeah, that's my big fear. I just don't think social slashing for this gray issue, like actually the that staking problem article I wrote in 2018, the hypothetical situation where it was going to happen was going to be in a massive exchange hack. My implication was there'd be an exchange hack, absolute chaos. What are they going to do? And all the validators say, we're going to vote in a different block. And they just start voting on a different block, and that transaction gets dropped from the network. And everyone goes, oh, thank God, we saved like a million ETH from being hacked,
Yeah,
but we lost fork choice in the process. So yeah, I
it'll
think
be
the
cheered.
situation, yeah, I guess exactly. Like all of the like retail go, thank God, hack, avoided, whatever. But the kind of IG log goes, oh no, Ethereum as a decentralized project is over.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is like like you can see it like with the ETFs, like assuming all these staked ETFs take place, they all custody a Coinbase. But it's going to look, it's not going to be Coinbase running all the validators themselves. They're going to deposit it into Lido or all of these different things, and it's going to be Coinbase owns the keys, but they're decentralized, right? And how
Yeah,
how do you
they've
how do
been
you think
good to
about
stay under
that?
the 33. It hasn't mattered for them as much anymore, but even from a self-preservation reason, as far as I'm aware, they do push ETH out if they're gonna go above 33% of the network.
Yeah, but I mean, how do you think about so you think it's just sort of self-limiting at this point that's going to save us? But like why? But if you had said should they be afraid of the social pressure? Like,
I think Brian is a good CEO and an IG log
yeah,
at heart, so I think, that's doing a lot of protection for us, but I don't know, there's sometimes like again an example of like, what would it take a US government to take control of the chain? It's like how many CEOs do they have to arrest to,
right.
like take over? It's, whatever like Brian being in charge versus, someone, arresting him. Um, but where I hope it would help a little, or this kind of goes back to the like distributed validators, is if Coinbase at least is running in groups, all of a sudden it becomes much harder to like kind of assert control over their stake. And they're like, no, look, even if we're hacked, bad day at the office, but it's fine. Like no one loses any money. Even if we try and be evil, we need two of the other companies to be evil with us or whatever. So it makes it much harder for the bad outcomes to happen because you have to coordinate to be evil as opposed to like deciding to be evil. So that's kind of one of the main reasons why I think working in small groups is like really important to be able to, have credible neutrality to use the word. That's kind of why I think it's super important and why I think Coinbase, give or take, at some point will run in distributed validators to hedge their risk, even for the custodian's sake. The custodian's like, hey, we don't really want all our eggs in one basket. Please go and like run with other high quality operators you trust.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess how does Obol help some of this problem?
So at its Obol can be used on its own,
Yeah,
where you just like one company and you run it in four different places and you kind of, lower your downtime risk. You can improve your hardware costs because you don't have to run the cloud and all of these good things. But on the decentralized side, where it like really comes into its own and doesn't really have a peer is when you run distributed validators with a group. Um, that'd be the idea of, having four, great companies run Coinbase custody stake for the staking ETFs and things like it. Even the digital asset treasury companies as well are going this direction, and it also allows them to consider running their own stake in a manner that might be too scary to do if it was solo. Like a lot of these digital asset treasury companies aren't ETH stakers, by background, maybe bar like Joe Lubin's one. But if they can say, oh, we'll be 1/4 of a cluster to start, we're running the node, we're gaining confidence, even if we go offline, the other three companies keep us online, great. And then, a year or two later, they're happier. They're like, we're going to run 2 out of 4 of the nodes because that way we don't have enough key material to like do something weird and get slashed, but neither do our counterparties have enough key material to collude against us and get slashed. So it's, a pretty stable situation for them in terms of, not having like issues or concerns. You might have spotted today, one of the big node operators has had to exit the entirety of their stake as kind of a safety measure because one of their other chains were compromised. And, it can be scary to be like, oh, how did that one get compromised? We're not 100% sure that our like infrastructure is, hacker free. Let's, take the risk and exit all of it. Um, it would be a much less scary situation if they had only distributed validators and they had pieces of a private key rather than like the full validator private key where they said the safe thing here to do is probably exit. Whereas it might be a bit of a different story if they didn't have, the entirety of the key and they couldn't get the entire cluster slashed, for example.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Um, so yeah, I guess, like I really like these social layer stuff. This is a fun topic. Um, because you guys, like I guess how do you guys think about or you personally, like obviously you're an ETH maxi and you're very, very pro censorship resistant in and of itself, but sometimes like the social layer does have opinions, it seems. Like like sometimes like blacklisting certain companies because they, go against your values or yeah, supporting your country or something like that. Like, what's the role of kind of the chain and where you put your money and you as a validator, should you express any opinion of any of that sort as a validator?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Kind, well, this relates to something that people call the proposer monopoly,
Yes.
which is that for, twice a year or something, you are the monopoly power over Ethereum. You're getting to produce a block, so for the next 4 seconds or so, like you're in charge. And people debate being like, should you have a choice as to what you do in those 4 seconds? Like, do you get to pick, your friends first? Do you get to like, put you what you want in there? Um, I
I,
think proposer monopolies are kind of bad. The clue's kind of in the name with the word monopoly. I think for Ethereum as a computer, as a system, it's probably better for it to be extremely neutral and not, really thing of, whoever gets to be a validator gets to decide what they want to do, especially because it's a very small amount of time anyways, and it kind of incentivizes people to monetize this monopoly. It's a fairly popular kind of set of technologies at the moment is called like pre-confirmations. So this idea of selling pieces of your monopoly like early, being like, I'm gonna have a monopoly on this block. I'll sell you, first dibs. I'll sell you second dibs. I'm gonna like, sell you the right to blacklist the other guy. It doesn't feel like the most credibly neutral direction to go. I think kind of in contention with this is something like Fossil, which is
yep.
technology that kind of forces a proposer to do certain things or to include certain transactions. I prefer that as a direction for Ethereum to be like, hey, you're the proposer, you get to put a block on the chain, but you have very little free will. You more or less have to put what we say. Maybe we'll give you some, power to order because it becomes difficult if you don't let them choose ordering, then the MEV goes other places, and there's reasons why, you can't just do first come, first served. But I think ideologically, I would prefer that people that the proposers in the Ethereum base layer is very neutral, doesn't have opinions like dumb proposers. And then on the like app layer, when you're building apps and whatever, I think that's where you can express your opinions and you can run with a whitelist or a blacklist, you can make security tokens, you can accept ZK proofs of humanness if you don't want AIs in there and everything up there, I think is pretty fair game to express opinions on how you want to sequence, what you want to do, things like that. But it doesn't really feel right to me that we should kind of politicize the base layer to maybe put it in those words.
Well, I mean, would you say it's because like we're sort of delegating the responsibility of picking what we want in the transactions to a market, right? Like
Mhm.
we're not choosing or we're basically just letting whoever has the most money get in, right?
Yeah,
And is that good long term? Or you know what I mean? Like is this the ideal system that we want, or do you think that maybe that is the ideal system we want at this base layer, I guess.
I think no, it probably is not great to just do a raw market. I think that's why things like fossil are interesting
Okay.
because it's forcing in transactions that are just in the mempool. And they
Okay.
might not be the most like MEV transactions. Like if you wanted to maximize your revenue or like someone pay the most, they'd maybe try and like outbid and try and keep them out or something of the sort. So these other mechanisms are more neutral than just like highest payer gets to choose indefinitely. I don't really think we should go too far on that side. And this kind of comes back to the idea of there will be big builders that can look at all the L2s and construct the most profitable block, but we don't want to over optimize there because then there'll be like two or three people picking fork choice just at a different, bottleneck for
Yes.
us. But if you do have 1,000 people saying, we look at the mempool, we saw this transaction, you got to include it. It's paying the base fee, you don't got a choice. I think that's preferable for neutrality than monopolies, basically. So
Well, I
that's
know
kind
like
of what, yeah.
well, did you see like there was a recent Flashbots report where like whenever you try and like whenever you move towards completely encrypted mempools and everything like that, people just start spamming the chain,
Yeah,
trying to guess on all these roll-ups. So like how long until people are spamming inclusion lists to try and farm MEV?
I'd say day one.
Yes.
And I really like that post. I think I know the one you're talking about. It kind of said that
I will include
MEV
it
is
for watchers.
yeah, it's that like MEV is the real bottleneck on scaling. Like it's not DA, it's not execution, it's not any of these things. It's that if there's MEV in the chain or if things come cheap enough, people will just like blind back run and just execute and try and like make arbs and stuff. And that is one of the arguments in favor of a like a clearing mechanism and an efficient auction. So it's yeah, I think the kind of balancing act is plausibly some amount on something like Fossil. Like the problem with Fossil is it's like a public mempool. You have to broadcast that transaction, and the problem is if there is MEV in it, someone can sandwich you, someone can like mess around with you. It doesn't force ordering. So I think the kind of middle ground is half of the gas limit target goes to fossil every time. So the public mempool is getting in. The other three quarters, proposes choice, and that we hope that we have decentralized block building win. And it's not just like one big block builder who has a load of money being like, yeah, we're the big dog in town and winning everything. You do hope that like, yeah, groups of people can build profitable blocks. And that's where I think Flashbots and like BuilderNet is one of the coolest things going. Maybe sometimes doesn't get enough credit for being the one of the biggest things to decentralize Ethereum, maybe
So why
by
do you like
distributed
that?
validators.
Because I know
Because
Flashbots gets a lot of bad rep too.
yeah, so they have built something specifically called BuilderNet,
Okay.
and that is a network of computers that act as like one builder, but they do it as a group. And normally that'd be too scary because you'd be afraid someone is going to defect and like sandwich attack and whatever. But all of the software runs in like TEEs, encrypted computers. So no one can cheat the rules. It's like, hi, here are my transactions, the amount of MEV that I can contribute. Let's all, build the most profitable block we can. And it is the only way really that like long tail people can produce blocks that are as profitable or more profitable than the big two other builders. They've gone from launching last October to being 30 something percent of the network. Um,
Thanks.
they have a roadmap now focused on becoming more permissionless. It's still gated and permission to be one of these nodes, but it is, I would say, the best we have so far in terms of like decentralized block building. Encrypted mempools, they're similar and might like I don't know if I have a strong opinion on whether these would outwin, but you can put your encrypted mempool transactions inside of a builder net block, so they're not either or. But yeah, that is in my eyes one of the few ways that we have, large groups of people building blocks and not just single very profitable companies building blocks.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess how do you think about all these different companies building these technologies? Like I know we talked to like I know the community talked about it with Lido a lot. Like you guys are probably implicated in this as well. There's a separate token ecosystem and community that is running core Ethereum infrastructure. Like how much of this should Ethereum look to absorb, or is this best left to other ecosystems? Like does it balance?
I think Ethereum Core should not be afraid to continue to like make changes to the protocol that favor decentralization and favor scaling and things like that. I think there's a little bit of care and trying in terms of being neutral and not actively doing anything too harmful. But at the same time, a lot of this tech needs the private market to be built. Like it won't get built fast enough in this central planning type of manner. I think Lido get a bad rap, but to me, Lido are the reason that Ethereum is not run by Kraken and Coinbase. I think before Lido, it was Kraken, Coinbase, Binance, and now, after Lido, it is no longer, or it's going back
Kraken,
that
Coinbase,
direction.
Binance, Lido.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But at the
Yeah.
same time, when how I said like fork choice is really what matters here,
Yeah.
Lido do not control the node operator's fork choice. They very studiously stay as far away as they can. So I think of them as way less scary than the central operators in that regard. Um, I think there's still risks, kind of mainly smart contract risks, upgrade risks, but they've done a lot there as well in terms of dual governance and time locks. There's very little by way of like emergency multi-sig and stuff. Um, so I think it's not too bad, but yeah, I think like some of these things do have to get built by Flashbots and Lido and Obol and people like them. Um, some things Ethereum can, benefit from, take into the protocol, can, push their finger on the scales towards decentralization and stuff. But I think they can also probably overdo it sometimes and jeopardize Ethereum's credible neutrality by trying to do things that might be seen to be like specifically targeting certain groups. Issuance maybe being one of them and stuff. It's like, hey, we don't, like that people are going towards liquid staking tokens. Let's just cut issuance and that'll, make people use ETH instead of liquid staking token. And then, the adverse effect they might not anticipate is that they, kill all like solo stakers. Um, so they have to be kind of judicious and careful with where they kind of put their finger on the scales too. Um, but I would say even in pretty much all of these companies, nearly everyone building like full time and like as hard as they are like ideologues that want Ethereum to succeed. I don't think there's anyone in these companies that don't and stuff.
For sure.
I think I first met a member of the Lido team in like 2021. It was super early days and they didn't admit to me where they worked at. They were like asking like, oh, you into staking? Cool. What do you think about the like projects and what do you think about Lido? And I was like, oh, I think they're the team that have made pragmatic design choices and will probably work. And 4 odd years later, I think that generally still stands. I think they make fairly pragmatic decisions that most people work.
Yeah. No, I mean it was yeah, like it was interesting the whole should they limit at 30 self-limit at 33% and that was a fun discussion, but we can it seems like they did honestly.
I
Um
don't think they did. I think the market did.
the market did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um But either way, it worked. I guess that's the market working in some ways. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So what did I forget as we come up on an hour? Anything else
Um,
we can add?
yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we're going in
Yes,
terms of
please.
kind of like out a bit further forward. So as it's probably pretty obvious here, the it is not economical to run an Ethereum validator. It is cheaper to delegate. It is kind of hard work. It's not super easy. It's, it is not where it needs to be. I think there are changes that I would love to see the Ethereum core like R&D make. I'm not going to worry too much about them. Well, we can. I think we've a bit of time. But the ones that I would love to see are a price to exit stake. So this is the idea that, we have EIP 1559 is this like base fee
Yep.
that gets exponentially expensive. There should be a priority queue, and you should be able to say, I would like to be out at finality, please. I'll pay the point 0.1 ETH. And in times of calm, that's fine. It'll go, people can use it if they want to skip the 2 weeks or whatever the free queue would be. And in general, it would be a great release valve. I talk about there's this idea that it's rational to panic in a bank run. If a like his bank is having a bank run, it is not irrational to say I better pull my money out. Um, right
But the
now,
game theory kind of breaks down, right?
well, it's the thing. It's game theoretically rational to panic first in a bank run.
Right, but the whole system breaks.
Yes. So this is where I'm
I
going.
don't know if
That
that's the right
Ethereum is the
analogy
problem.
here.
Well,
Yes.
maybe you'll see where I'm going with this. So let's say there is a hard fork, a contentious hard fork that is like load of FUD, and everyone's like, oh, I don't know,
Oh, right.
USDC is gonna steal all your money after the hard fork and stuff, and it's 60 days away, and the queue goes, 12 days, 20 days, 40 days. It's rational to go, I better get out, like slap the button, like, exit. Um, and all of a sudden this queue can explode. If you had a price to exit, people would sit there much more calmly. They can be like, I can get out at this price whenever.
Yeah, we
And
might come around to our senses or something.
yeah, and that
Yeah,
like you don't have to. If you want it, you can have it. But even just the fact that you have the option to leave
sure.
makes people like not panic, and they can use it. So I think that would be helpful. And then even just from trying to make the like long tail of stakers viable. Um, there is no way, like, no one wants 45 days to exit. Like it's just dramatically like a worse product. But if there was a way to be like, cool, I can like pay to be out, and it's probably a little higher right now because the free queue is 45 days, but it's
Right.
the
Like
market
if
forces.
ETH spikes to $50,000, I can get out and dump it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it'll probably like, run in line with what it would cost to borrow ETH for the duration of the queue.
Yeah.
So it would sit there pretty stably. So I think a price like a protocol price to exit would be very good. It also helps the like small tail liquid staking tokens. They can have more liquidity. It's often if you were like a big capital allocator, you don't want to go to a tiny LST because you're like it might not be liquid enough on, exchanges and AMMs and stuff to like exit. So for a lot of reasons, I think that would be very good for the liquidity penalty that native staking costs. Um, Liveness correlation penalties is another big one. This is the idea that right now we have correlation penalties, but only for slashing, which is if a lot of people get slashed at the same time, there's this really non-linear penalty and you get like really punished for it. Slashings don't happen often enough, and people are not like learning their lesson. If we had a penalty like that, but for outages, just you go offline, people would learn their lesson in the like small issues, and we'd be in a much better shape for a slashing situation. So I don't know, if we had like some client fail and 20% of people go offline, and maybe it's only down for a day, but if you lose 3 months of rewards because you went offline in a correlated manner, you're like, oh, that sucks. I'm gonna pick a more decentralized setup next time so that if I do go offline, I'm, not losing like most of my year's
Yeah.
rewards. That would be a big one, I think, that would like, help push decentralization before we need it. And what was the other one? They were like two of my main pet like projects in terms of the like how to decentralize ETH a bit more. But um coming back to more what like Obol is doing and building, we have I don't know, somewhere in the region of a few hundred, approaching 1,000 mainnet node operators. And a lot of these people don't make enough money to, consider the super viable. Unless you're one of the big like delegate companies like getting billions of dollars, it is a ideological endeavor. So a lot of these people are looking to be like, what else can we run? And right now it is pretty complicated to add on some extra piece of software to run in your node. That is, I want to maybe run an L2. Some L2 will pay me to like run their full node. Maybe I want to run some like AVS in the kind of eigenlayer symbiotic world. Maybe I just want to run a DApp locally and an Explorer locally and I want to have like some privacy. Um, it's not easy enough to install like real decentralized applications yet. And similarly, there's not really enough incentive for a dApp developer to release something, to these people. So we're building the Obol stack, which is at its simplest, it's an Ethereum L1 node that comes packaged inside Kubernetes. And it allows app developers to release Helm charts with everything they need to run their application, like packaged and installed. And then the node operator just, runs one line command, install, and they get their app like running on their box. The main, like early days people would be targeting would be the likes of node operators and like layer twos and roll up as a service type of stack. But directionally we'd be going towards more like retail users that just want like privacy and to run their own node locally. um, you should be
Cool.
able to, you know, connect your wallet to an Explorer that runs on your own machine. You can, interact on your L2, you can interact on L1, you can have your dApps, on your own machine, maybe pulled over IPFS. This is what we're doing on the kind of user and like node operator side. And the goal there is to lower the friction for a dApp developer to release apps to people and for a node operator or like a user to download and install like real decentralized like local first apps. And that's kind of close to what you alluded to when we said, oh, will people run full nodes? I hope so. It's getting easier. Like you can run them with light clients. We also have full nodes are down to half a terabyte in disk, which is better than it used to be, and they'll kind of come lower. So that's kind of what we're working on in that regard. And that'll be, open source probably about a week or so, maybe two.
Nice.
And it'll still be super alpha and really early, but the goal is for the most part to make it feasible for like app developers first and foremost. They're like kind of the, key to go to market. If it's easy for them to distribute their software and to get like, a few hundred, a few thousand node operators running their apps, like that's what I'm hoping for. I think to give a concrete example, I think of Aztec as a great partner of ours that we're, working with in this regard. They are a layer two, but they're a layer two that need a lot of sequencers. They can't just have one big centralized sequencer.
Because they're
So they
private,
have
right?
yeah. So they have an incentive to have a huge amount of sequencers running. So they want people to be like, cool, yeah, run a sequencer, run the node, along with your L1, great. And then, when they turn on the full chain, you're not going to use a private app on a SaaS product and you're like logging into someone's website. It kind of defeats the purpose to some extent. So you're like, cool, I'm going to run this locally, run my Oval stack, run my Aztec Layer 2, open my Aztec app that, does something with privacy and I interact with it, all locally. And you have a good time and never leave your machine bar, for the P2P network side. Um, that's kind of the fun and the new product on the horizon, I'd say, for us at Obol.
That's super cool. Yeah, no, maybe after you guys are running for a while, I can come and try them out and give it a go.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, on the last note too, you guys have some of the coolest names. Obol, super great. I actually was running a project called Karen, like your thing back in like 2022, and then I saw you guys were picking it up. And I'm like, what the hell? Uh,
Sorry.
it's an awesome name. It's
It is. Yeah. My
but
co-founder actually had the plan for Obol. It was like a Greek people's money at the time, and he was like, "We're gonna call it Obol." And I was like, "Four letters. We have the domain. Cool. Yeah, like, no problem." And then I was like, "Let me open up like Wikipedia," and I came across like Charon's Obol. Charon being the
yep,
ferryman that would like bring you to the afterlife and stuff, and you used to pay for them in Obol. And at the time, I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's like you'll pay for Carol and Obol, but we didn't go down that route. Nobody likes, to be paying in utility tokens for stuff. But yeah, that's kind of where that came from.
It's super cool. Yeah. Well, anyway, where can people find out more? Where can yeah,
So obol.org is kind of the main landing place. You can find everything there. Obol.org/stack is where you'll get the kind of page for the stack. There's a sign up for early access page if you want to give it a try. I would say you can reach me on Twitter at Oisin. Tough one to spell,
nice.
but you'll figure it out from the podcast, I'm sure.
I'll take it
And yeah, I'd love to have more people caring about ETH decentralization. I would love more people, thinking that Nakamoto coefficients are more important than economic security. And yeah, that we can just kind of grow the amount of people that I don't know are in it for the mission versus in it for the money.
Awesome. Yeah. Great words to end on. Thank you, Oshin.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's been a pleasure.